Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. This podcast is for those who are living with the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol, their loved ones, and anyone else wanting to learn more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Each week, you'll hear from someone whose expertise is either professional or living experience with FASD. I'm your host, Patti Kasper, bringing you both. Now let's get started with another candid conversation. This week, I am so excited to bring to the mic Dr. Maude Champagne, and she has written a book. I can't wait to get it. It's already ordered, but we set this interview up before I was able to receive it and read it, but I'm so excited about it. And we will be telling you about this book as the interview goes on. But Maude, please introduce yourself to the audience and let us know maybe what led you to work with those who have FASD as well as other brain-based disabilities and about your book.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Dr. Maude Champagne. You can hear my French accent. I'm French Canadian. And I've been working in the FASD field, I guess, for over 20 years. So in my 20s, I became an FASD worker. So in Canada, they had specialized social worker working with families who had children with FASD, but I also had many families where the parent had FASD themselves, and then they had children themselves with prenatal exposure to alcohol. And that became a passion of mine. I really enjoyed the humor that people with FASD have. In my Quebecois culture, we don't have much of a filter. We say things like they are, and I felt like I relate to people with FASD because most people with FASD don't have much of a filter. So I really like that. And so I also became a therapist working with families who were fostering or adopting children and young people with FASD. Most of them also had a history of trauma. Some of them were misdiagnosed. And we also started a program in Ontario, Canada, in the capital. It's called Ottawa, uh, specifically for families raising children and youth with FASD. So it's always been, I guess, the focus of my work. And then when I did my PhD, it was specifically for families raising children and youth with FASD. However, when I wrote my book, we realized that it also applied to many of the other brain-based disabilities, like, or even someone who, like a child who has developmental trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So we extended it, but you'll see in the book there's a lot for people who have been adopted, who have trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe prenatal exposures, and you see it in the case studies. Like it's very like the profiles are very similar to people with FASD.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay. So your book, can you hold it up for folks to
Yes.
see?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's called Decoding Aggression, Complex Behaviors and Brain-Based Disabilities. And I think, a lot of people, when they see the title, they think, okay, she's going to teach us how to fix the behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not
Mm-hmm.
about fixing the behaviors. It's about supporting the whole family system. Children, young people that don't grow up on rocks. We all live in interdependence.
Yes.
So we need to not just focus on the person who has FASD or who's displaying these difficult behaviors. We have to focus on also supporting their siblings, their caregivers, people around them,
Mm-hmm.
so they can continue having a safe relationship and improve in how they communicate with each other. So that's the focus on the book. It's really about supporting all family members around the person who has FASD, or not just FASD, but aggressive
Any
response.
brain-based. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you hone in particular with aggression? Because
Mm.
that seems to me to be a particular field that draws a certain kind of person for particular reasons?
Thank you for asking. And so what happened is before COVID, I was working in private practice. Most of my clients were families who had adopted children with FASD. Many of them were struggling, and we were trying to support the families, improve the behaviors, focus on attachment, if there was trauma, healing the trauma, and some good results with many families. But during COVID, the families that were, I guess, staying afloat were drowning,
Mhm.
even if they were not new adoptions. So I had started my PhD. It was very, very early, like maybe I was a month in.
Mhm.
And so we were seeing that struggle that people were having. So we decided to do a study on how families were coping during COVID when they had children with FASD. And we saw a really high rate of aggressive behaviors in children. And that led to the children having to live somewhere else.
Mhm.
That led to parents being quite traumatized, siblings being traumatized. And when I say siblings, in the adoption world, there, and I'm not saying that everybody with FASD was adopted, but that's my field. So that's why I talk about this. But anyway, and in my studies, they were all adoptive or foster families. So sometimes there's like more than one siblings who has FASD, and that brings other challenges, right? Because we're all like to the parents, you have to co-regulate your child, de-escalate the situation. But then sometimes it's the kids together that are escalating one another, and it's very difficult and tricky. So when we saw that, we're like, okay, what are we doing? Like, how will we respond to support these families? Honestly, at first, I did not want to touch this with a 10-foot pole because I'm like, FASD is so stigmatized. If we say that they're violent and aggressive on top of things, like that's it. It's really bad for them.
Yeah.
And yet families were like, we need help.
And on the other hand, any parent who turns to Dr. Google for answers will not be looking very long before they start seeing a slew of articles about the school to prison pipeline because of aggression and things like that. So then they begin to fear my child's going to grow up very aggressive. And especially if they're seeing escalations in the house, it's easy to feed the belief. And then that expectation will help set the table for
Yeah,
self-fulfilling prophecies.
exactly. And it's hard to predict because within the same family, you can have biological siblings who have prenatally exposed to alcohol, and they all have very different functioning level and
Mm-hmm.
behaviors.
Yeah.
So, it's not like we can say, okay, if you've been prenatally exposed to alcohol, here's what's going to happen to you. And if you do this, this is all going to be solved. No,
Right.
there's some strategies, things that we can put in place that are helping, but they don't necessarily fix everything. And sometimes, we see families struggle and we want a magic wand and go like, this is what we're going to do and you'll be fine. It's not working like that. But I think from my research and from the interviews we had with so many families who have been going through this, and even with young adults who have FASD and have been displaying these behaviors when they were younger, they told us about what was actually helpful to them. That's what the book's about. It's about sharing these practices.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Maybe towards the end of our conversation, you can give us a couple of those specifics.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I would love that. So you're broadening your horizons to a wider variety of neurodivergence, right? And neurodiversities. Um, and yet most of your case notes in the book are from your work, which has been predominantly FASD. To absolutely the perfect person to talk with about this topic because it really fills so many family members with despair, because they can oftentimes get so intimidated by their loved one's hair trigger, so to speak. You know, a friend of mine and frequent guest, Antonia Rathbun Lindsay, she conceptualizes porcupines from some of her work with the indigenous communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. One of the little children was drawing mice, and when he's upset, the hair stands up and it looked like a porcupine. And she noted how in family systems, all these mice turn into porcupines at the same moment, because when one person is triggered, it tends to trigger the other people. And of course, parents we're just as easily affected and triggered as well because of our own histories, because of sometimes even our own PTSD around some of the outbursts and challenging behaviors. So how do you kind of unwind that for families?
Yes, and I think the message I'm trying to share, I guess, that applies to FASD and any parent who has a child who displays difficult behaviors in a context of trauma, brain-based disability, is it's impossible to respond well all the time. It is impossible because we're all human.
Yeah.
Like you said, some of us have our own trauma. We sometimes we're tired, sometimes it's our hormones. There's so many factors that play even in the caregiver. And even in the context of a parent who's well regulated, well adjusted, it is possible for children to not accept co-regulation from the parent. So there's so much pressure, especially in the adoption world, I feel like, even in the disability world, that, you're supposed to be like the perfect parent, be on top of your game all the time. And I say that because I have 5 kids. 3 of them came to me by adoption. So I know as a parent, the pressure of, wanting to give the best life to my kids, be that parent that can co-regulate, be adjusted. It's not possible to do it all the time. I don't do it well all the
And
time.
as you foster, you have all these extra sets of authoritative eyeballs on you,
Yeah.
watching your every move, judging your parenting skills from a place where they probably don't know much about neurodiversity and how to help direct the stress.
And I think a lot of time, I have a post on my LinkedIn today on this, but most of us are trained to assess parental capacity based on the child's behavior. But if your child has trauma or neurodiversity, it's possible that their behaviors are not that great, right? And it's not about your parenting. So
Yeah.
you have to assess your own parenting based on like, am I a good enough parent, right? Am I consistent enough? We're never 100% consistent, but so it's looking at how you respond, like what are the skills that you have? Are you taking care of yourself? Are you setting boundaries so you can, sustain your caregiving long term? It's all these things that I think we have to be proud that we're doing and not having pride in the milestones that our kids are achieving or not, or in their behaviors.
Yeah.
So it's like really, it's a different lens of like not being so focused on the behavior. And I'm not saying that, like with my kids, and I always recommend it to families, you can still do OT and speech therapy. I've done all these things. Like they're very helpful, but not that much pressure on yourself all the time to do all these things to try to fix the person.
And I think too, that's one of the keys, trying to fix the person, because so much of the emphasis in our field, of various helping professions, is about changing behavior without looking at what led to the behavior and fixing things. But we're neurodiverse. We're not neuro wrong, right? We're just different. we're wired differently, but that doesn't mean that we're broken. And people in the system, and I can say that as a former social worker and a former therapist, people without that training, we're holding parents to a standard that's impossible to meet.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because normalcy is such a myth. Yeah,
Yes. By the way, there's a bonus chapter on FASD in my book. At first, it was like, I was actually the first chapter, and then I was told, well, it's not just for people with FASD. So you have to keep it
yeah.
as a bonus chapter where, you know what I was told when I was really concerned about stigmatizing people with FASD further by saying, okay, they can display aggressive behaviors, is always put it within a context.
Mhm.
So the chapter describes what are the factors that may lead someone with FASD to display aggressive behaviors or dangerous behaviors. Because what I include might be also, there's a lot of young women in my practice where they have FASD and judgment's more difficult for them. So they may be vulnerable to sex trafficking or, dating older men who may not be safe. So what do you do, right? And like to be supportive, provide accommodations, um, not stigmatize them further. So these, when I say aggressive behaviors, it also includes dangerous behaviors that they may have towards themselves, like putting themselves into danger. It's not just about other people, it's both. So I talk about that. I talk about when is it that you'll be providing accommodations and maybe what are some of the factors that can actually change in
Mhm.
someone with FASD. So also, but that's more for professional, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, like trying to demystify which needs accommodation, which needs treatment, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the very first word in your title is decoding.
Yeah.
Decoding the aggression. So it sounds like you're really wanting to help people look under the hood, right? Look to what led to this. And I'm curious if you get to, when we talk about brain-based, in part, that seems to be the up and coming common lingo for neurobehavioral conditions. I don't know that everyone really does the deep dive into what that means in terms of brain-based, because that's the one thing about alcohol. The reason why we are all so very different one from another living with this condition is that there are so many factors that affect the way we are impacted by the exposure. And so there's different regions of the brain that take a hit depending on which part is supposed to be developing at that time.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a number of brain regions that are involved in aggression. Do you get into that in your book at all?
So the feedback that I got from people who have read it is at first they thought, okay, Maude's an academic, so it's going to be academic like heavy. It's not. Like
Okay.
all the references are at the end. It's very kind of practical and clear. So yes, I talk about the factors, but it's not like that academic lingo and like it's not really complicated.
We don't
Can
have to
put it
be
this way.
students to be able to understand. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wanted
Yeah.
this, it's such a heavy topic at the same time. I didn't want to go like, like into like sometimes you try to explain a simple concept and people use very complicated words and English is my second language. I'm like, let's just keep it simple. So I do in a way that is like, okay, let's look at each factor. Is there something we can do? And this is what it looks like
Mhm.
in real life. And here are some of the case studies to show the practicability
Yeah.
of some of these recommendations to people. Yeah, and again, it's not about fixing the behaviors in my book. So let's say I don't go into details of, let's say, sensory issues. There are tons of books how can you accommodate for the sensory issues? I don't go into the specific. I'm more like, here are the things you need to look at. Sensory issues are one of them, and you do need to provide accommodations for that one.
Mhm.
Am I answering your question
I,
correctly?
I think so. And, I've noticed that about myself. I am far more irritable if my senses are being overstimulated. So, like if I'm in a very crowded, busy space or a very noisy space, I'm much more irritable than I am at other times. Um, and I think one of the other things I was thinking of when I raised that question was, there are parts of the brain that determine, the length of our fuse. If you think of the
Yeah.
explosion, there's usually a fuse that leads to that stick of dynamite, right? And I think that's one of the effects of prenatal alcohol exposure is the length of that fuse. And that can be influenced by so many things. Like, are we correctly reading the intentions of the other people? If we are hypersensitive to tone of voice, we may experience someone as being angry with us when they're not. And that can be very frustrating to both parties, right? And lead to a lot of arguments, if not aggression.
Yes, yes. And I would say that when we talk to people who had been displaying these behaviors when they were younger
Mhm,
and then they got older, and even if they had FASD, many of them were not using these behaviors anymore. They said they learned to manage their emotions better.
mhm.
And many of them mentioned communication skills, that they learned to communicate better, and the people around them learned to communicate with them
Yeah,
a
because it
better
is
way,
a two-way
right? In a way
street.
that they understood. I think it's like it's oversimplified to say that aggressive behaviors are always the communication issues. It's not. Like you said, like you're thinking sensory, sleep, HPA pathway that's dysregulated, it's being in pain, feeling hot, feeling hungry. All these things are factors.
Mhm.
And you know, so on one hand, it's good to look at the factors, keep that in the back of your mind. At the same time, I would say for a caregiver or someone supporting someone with FASD, it can get really like overwhelming to think
Mhm.
of all these factors all the time. Like I have caregivers that are like, maybe it was the sleep, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. And like they're so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's like try to have as much of a good routine,
Mhm.
structure, baseline to avoid some of that overstimulation, lack of sleep, all these things. But at the same time, you also need to find the right support so you
Mhm.
can sustain that and not always being in like looking at the triggers and
Yeah,
thinking about that all the time because that's very draining.
it
It's
is.
like finding a balance between not over accommodating at the same times, finding ways for the person with FASD to expand their world, maybe expand their tolerance level
Mhm.
sometimes. I think it's kind of both. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like you're probably familiar with Diane Malbin. I was trained by Diane,
Mhm.
and it was so much about teaching people that FASD is a brain-based disability. We need to provide accommodations. So here's one truth. And the other truth is like, how can we continue help them tolerate a certain level of anxiety? I'll
Yeah.
give you an example, like a very practical example. Have you heard of like Miles Emmerich?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's very
And
popular.
I am because I was trained in facets.
Yes, me
So,
too. That's when I
yeah.
started. So, Miles talked about a situation where he said, like I cannot tolerate the smell on planes.
Mhm.
And another recommendation would be like no longer going plane at all.
Mhm.
So then you don't travel anymore. And you like your world can get smaller and smaller. So his accommodation was like wearing his own perfume that he likes and a
Mhm.
hood, like a hoodie. So that way he's able to go on the plane. So you see, this is what I mean by accommodation versus over accommodation. And we see that when there's a lot of aggressive behaviors in the home, sometimes there's a
Mhm.
lot of over accommodations that have been made for the child, and they end up living in the basement, only playing video games, no longer having friends,
Yeah,
lots of course behaviors, and that comes with over accommodation, rarely not enough accommodation.
yeah.
So it's trying to find that balance, and this is what I talk about in the book.
That sounds wonderful. And it sounds like your book will be just as helpful for those of us who live with this as it is for family members and caregivers and or even for spouses. Because
Yes,
so many of us do go on to, have families of our own. For instance, with me, I've been married for years and years and years before I realized, oh, I have FASD. But
yeah,
looking back over the pattern of conflicts, it's like, oh, that explains that, and this explains that, and it's not to blame everything on FASD, not at all, because there's two people in every relationship, right? And
hmm.
and that's true for absolutely everybody. But it sounds as though this book will be very helpful for those who want to fine tune the way that they are managing their current situations.
There's a chapter in my book actually on parents who are themselves neurodivergent.
Okay.
So even now, we don't see it as much in the adoptive parents. So sometimes, like let's say one of the parent has autism or severe ADHD. But in my practice, when I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, many parents had FASD themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you support them in regulating their own emotion, responding to their children in a way that's helpful and safe?
Yeah.
And also talking about how to provide accommodations so they're able to attend the appointments. I mean, your adaptive skills are probably really high. You're organizing so many
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
you're educated. But for some people with FASD, adaptive functioning skills are quite low.
Yeah.
And how do you make sure that they're able to, let's say, attend support groups,
Mhm.
gain new parenting strategies, um, and in a way that feels safe to them? And
I know.
oftentimes, I feel like peer support is the key.
Yeah. I know one of the things that really struck me in going through the facets curriculum, learning to when I was being trained to be a facilitator, was the case example that I probably originated with Diane because so many of the examples they used did come from her, or at least through her from wherever she learned them. That in the social work system in child welfare, a lot of birth parents fail to get their kids back, but how tragic would it be for social workers to be so frustrated with their birth parent clients not fulfilling their case plans? And that really struck me because in looking at, I was employed in a private nonprofit. So our local county contracted with the company I worked for to provide oversight of the kids and their families, do a lot of those support visits, but we didn't have much to do with the birth parents themselves.
Mhm.
But we had ears and we heard the frustrations of so many of the social workers who were saying that exact same thing. It's such a simple program. Why can't they get this? They deserve to lose their kids. Well, no, they don't. They deserve support that they can access. If alcohol use is passed down generationally, well, so too are the effects of prenatal alcohol, you know. And once you recognize that a parent is struggling because they have the same disabilities that we see in their children, I mean, that really changes things. And it just makes the whole system that much more heartbreaking.
Yes, I agree. And there's so much pressure to ask parents to do this alone in our culture. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm in North America as well, a different country,
Mhm.
but very similar. Like we're so focused on being independent
Mhm.
and to do it on your own.
Yeah.
But when you have a child who has a neurodevelopmental disability or complex trauma, you cannot do this alone. It's
Yeah.
like asking someone climb the Everest, take a few training, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Just
There.
by yourself or with your partner. It's impossible. Like so we're and especially in the adoption world attachment, they say, oh, you need to like be the main caregiver and do this alone, like you do that cocooning phase. And I did that when I adopted, but I shot myself in the foot. We really need to have a broader network of supporters. And people with FASD, I mean, we all need it, but people with FASD need it more when they're adults usually. So starting younger and having aunt, uncle, neighbors,
Mhm.
maybe professionals to like other people to be supporting the person in different areas of their life to normalize it and to make sure that we don't burn out the caregivers. And that if caregivers are older or maybe they have neurodivergence that doesn't allow them to fully meet the needs of the young person with FASD, then at least there's other adults, right?
Mhm.
So I think birth parents and foster parents and adoptive parents, we all need that network of supporters for ourselves and for the young person that we care for, so we can
Yeah.
be successful, or maybe
Well, if
successful
our own batteries are
outcome.
depleted, we'll never be able to help a child recharge. So, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I that I, learned about in facets, but I had also seen be true in my 25 years of child welfare is a lot of the extended family members of the foster and adopt parents would reject the child, and if the parents stood by the child, then they distanced themselves from the parents who needed them more at that point than ever. I've worked with a family whose parents said, take that child back to the shelter. It's like, it's not a puppy from the pound. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. We see that here too. And yeah, I what we've been trying to do, it's hard to grow a network of supporters for family, especially if the relatives are not really open to it. Part of our role has been providing training to people around them. We sometimes write an email, we make a video, like we have all sorts of tips to teach people around them um, from the lens of a professional. Okay, here's why this child's behaving the way they're doing to reduce the stigma and reduce the shame that the parents are experiencing and bring some empathy back, I guess, and understanding of where the behaviors are coming from. And this is not about parenting, it's about, maybe trauma, maybe brain-based disabilities, whatever that is, we explain it in terms that they will likely understand. And for them to understand this is a disability, it's not like the person wants to be mean,
Right,
talking about intentions.
right.
So we found that this has been also really helpful for families. Of course, some people will stare in their judgment, like that's just how life is. But I think, some parents, some adults, once you give them the information, they're like, okay, and we want to be supportive. And sometimes it's just by doing little things like texting the young person, showing up, bringing a meal. There's so many things that they can do that's helpful for parents.
Mhm.
I have found too that having that peer support aspect, kind of like what you have with your community of other adults who have FASD, like understanding one another, not feeling judged, like having other people who are not experiencing the exact same situation, but very similar feelings is so validating and
Yeah,
brings some relief.
yeah. Oh, Are there any specific tidbits from your book, like suggestions that you could share? Any specifics, like what are your go-to starter strategies that you recommend?
Oh, so many things come to mind. I'm like, oh no, like the starters. It really depends. But usually the first thing
You
I
know
get,
how Diane talks about starter strategies, right?
I'm not like that. I'm less structured. Okay, so that's me. Um, I think my main thing is usually I ask families, how's your quality of life? And what will improve your quality of life? I'd say almost anytime, Patricia, like people would say, oh, if my child, did this or that better, like talking about the behaviors that's so impacting on their safety and things like that. And I'm like, no, beyond that. And usually they're like, well, I'd like to go biking again. I'd like to have more time with my partner. Um, and then I ask all family members, what would improve your quality of life? And also the person with FASD and the siblings, and sometimes many siblings have FASD in the family. And just starting with these things and looking at how can we improve the safety, everyone, and these little things of, yeah, improvement in the quality of life. So that's usually my go-to, not just focusing on like the child, quality of life of everybody.
Mhm.
And one thing that it's all over the research in FASD, and people don't talk about it that much, is the triangulation. We all have different perspective over a situation, but as you know, people with FASD, they have memory issues. The perspective is sometimes tainted by that.
Yeah.
Also can be tainted by trauma. Many people with FASD have been through microaggression because people don't understand they have a disability or they don't know themselves.
Right.
That leads to microaggression. Microaggression, it's like, if I poke you like this, maybe just slightly, but all the time, it will lead to trauma,
Yeah.
right? So that's microaggression. And no, I can't remember why I'm saying that. Okay, yes. So triangulation. So whenever I see people with FASD in my office, I ask consent, do you have people you trust that I can also talk to? So usually together, and I gain multiple perspective.
Hmm.
So they do talk about having multiple perspective. eh, regarding a situation that was maybe dangerous and making sure that then they don't leave my office with just like, oh, here are some strategies. They need to have other people to help them do these strategies, encourage them, and make sure that they have some accountability. I think this is something that has been very helpful when people start applying that, like involving the network around the person. They're not alone with this.
Yeah.
That's another go-to strategy for me. You did mention earlier it's again about the perspective. Let's say you think someone is mad when they're not.
Hmm.
I talk about it in my book. There's a whole chapter on it. It's called hostile attribution bias.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's say I said, "Oh, I'll send you flowers." You might think, if you've been manipulated in the past, you might think, "What does she want?" Right? Like you think there's some bad intention. And we see that a lot with neurodivergence and
Mhm.
trauma. And I see that anyone who displays aggressive behaviors, usually there's hostile attribution bias, right? Like in the classroom, some things might come up, then the child hits the other child, and you're like, what happened? And they're like, he did this. I think that's what he meant. That's not really what happened, but that was their perspective in the moment.
Right.
So working to help someone with FASD not having that hostile attribution bias as much, being able to stop and go, what do they mean by that? Right? Maybe I'll ask this person or I'll ask them before I react so strongly. It's a process that we all go through, anyone, but even more so, I think, when you have a neural disability.
And that can be one of the biologically induced challenges that we
Mm,
have, right? Is our metacognition, our thinking about our thinking is oftentimes hampered. It's difficult to take someone else's perspective and to be able to see other people's point of view. So, and that of course would make trying to de-escalate things a lot more challenging.
Especially if we're still in the moment, right? Dysregulated. I
Yeah.
use stories a lot. I found someone said to me, it's so abstract to see someone else's perspective
Mm.
and the metacognition, all very abstract. So using
Yeah.
stories, usually it's helpful.
Yeah.
And there's so much shame around, our behaviors sometimes. So if we go at it by talking about someone else or about animals, anything else that's external to
Mhm.
the present issue,
Yeah.
usually it's easier for the person to reflect on it.
Yeah.
I have found that a lot of my clients with FASD sometimes in my office are like, I don't know. And then they think about it and they come back and they're like, I've been thinking about what you said.
Yeah.
And
Delayed
right?
processing.
Yeah, yeah. And like doesn't mean it's changing their behaviors, in the future, but sometimes it's changing how they feel about themselves.
Mhm.
And it's improving the relationship they may have with other people in their life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating and wonderful conversation. I am so glad that you accepted my invitation to come on the podcast.
I
So,
saw after you invited me during my vacation actually that I saw your message and I'm like, oh, this is fun. I love going to podcasts and meet new people. And
yeah,
it's helping me having these conversations with others to see like what else do people with FSD need to and the people around them that they love to have a better quality of life.
yeah,
And it is possible. I think you're right. Like there's so much pessimism around the quality of life of people with FASD. And like I have friends who are adults with FASD and they live a really good life. They're actually better organized than I am, some of them.
it goes back to we're all impacted differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yes.
yeah. My husband's very OCD. Everything has to be very neat and orderly, right? He's ex-military, and then
Mm,
there's me with my organized chaos.
yeah. Partners can be helpful, although that's aggravating sometimes when you're polar opposite.
Right?
But that's how we improve partners.
Anyway, I'm very, very grateful for the time that we have spent together. And I would love to have you back on again sometime, maybe after I've been able to read your book.
Yes, yes, please.
It
You'll have
arrives in
questions, I'm
two
sure.
days. So, yeah, I would absolutely love that. And I certainly will be helping to promote your book. I'll have the link, the Amazon link in the show notes. So anyone who's become curious after hearing our conversation can very easily order it for themselves. So,
Yes, and I'm always open to questions. I can be found on LinkedIn easily, Dr. Maude Champagne. My business is called Blooming with Neuroscience. So it's also on Facebook. It's easy to find. I have videos in French, English. I share resources. Some of them are FASD related. Some of them are more around trauma, adoption. Also, um, we call it AFCA, aggression towards family members during childhood and adolescence in Canada. UK, New Zealand, Australia, they call it CPVA, Child Parent Violence and Aggression.
mhm,
And there's a lot of parents who are involved in this world who have children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder,
yeah.
especially not when, but if they live in regions where they're lacking support.
Mhm.
Right? It
Well,
can lead to,
let's talk a little bit about that before we close out our
yeah.
conversation, because that is such a powerful stressor in a lot of family systems. I have friends with adult children who will never be fully independent. One of them, their child has been in the school to prison pipeline, is now home, but not welcome at home because of the history of family violence. Another is she's facing significant health issues and is really worried to death for her young adults because their ability to be independent is significantly hampered. And one of whom, and I think in that particular family, part of the problem was the school systems really did a disservice and addressing things with a psychological lens, right? A matter of
Mm,
choice and attention.
yeah.
They're bad kids, right? Instead of through a neurological lens. And the systems have on paper been viewing these kids as being violent, being bad, just being very punitive and restrictive when they have had to step in to provide respite or whatever. And they're really doing these young people a disservice. So what is something that families can do if family violence is part of their story? It's not for all of us. We don't all, I don't kill anything other than flies, and then only if they come in my house.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's an important message to say that not everyone with FASD will,
Right.
display of behaviors. Really, it's not. But when it happens, parents need help. Everybody in the family needs help. And this is usually the reason why people go for psychiatric support. And
Mm,
this is also the main reason why the young people have to go live somewhere else.
mm,
So in my practice, we use nonviolent resistance. It's not nonviolent communication. It's different. NVR, you can find some information online. I give trainings on it. And it's how to build a circle of support around the family and the young person,
mm,
especially if we know they won't be able to live independently. And we talk about de-escalation. We talk about restorative time for the parents. I talk about NVR in my book as well. And
mm.
I found a really good book that I've been reading. It's NVR based as well. It's by Dan Dahlberger. It's called Non-Emerging Adults. I will send you the link if you
Okay.
want to attach it to the podcast. It's his main program, I think, was for parents who have children with autism,
Mm,
but then they were displaying harmful behaviors and they were not launching into adulthood, whatever it looks like for someone with a brain-based disability, right? It's taking that into account,
yeah.
but also taking into account that maybe the parents can no longer have the young person at home, but
Mm,
they're violent or aggressive. Usually I say they display aggressive behaviors, not violent,
yeah.
but it's dangerous. So what do you do? And they have a process in that book and how to ask for support, the right support, how to do that gently. And
Mm,
sometimes I don't know in the families you're seeing, but sometimes it comes with suicidal threats. And the parents are really scared.
yeah.
Say, no, you can no longer live at home. And we have caregivers that are quite old. They can no longer do it. They have all sorts of health issues and they still have the young person at home. It's not healthy for anyone.
Right.
The book discusses these challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, because some caregivers they know that they're burning the candle at both ends. They know
Yeah.
they don't have the physical capacity to outlive their loved one with whom it's dangerous to live and care for.
Yeah.
And that stress does significantly negatively impact how well they're dealing with their own health issues, their own mental health issues. But when people comment to them, I don't know how you do it, or
Mm.
what choice do they have but to keep plugging
Yeah.
along, right? So,
It's also, I want to mention, like, give strategies to caregivers but at the same time, it's also a very systemic issue. The
mhm,
system has to provide these resources and the funding and the approaches and out of home support sometimes,
yeah.
right? Like there's so much we can do. And I think I don't
The
want
system
to
has to
say it
learn
falls
first.
all on caregivers. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
The
Yeah.
system has to learn these. These aren't psychological issues, they're neurological. Yeah.
Exactly.
What a marvelous conversation. Maude,
Thank you for having me, Patti.
I hope that all my viewers and listeners will follow the link in the show notes and pick up a copy of your book. I would love to also put the link to that other book in there as well. Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. It was so
Thank you
so
so
good to
much.
have you on the show today.
Thank you, Patti.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on Living with FASD.